Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Kind of an important day today. Some really important stuff happened today. For instance, Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh was in the area because today I spent a little time on the picket line at a Kellogg's facility down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where they are part of a nationwide strike. You've got 4 facilities across the country who are on strike, 1,400 Kellogg's workers. As I was talking to people, the main problem is this idiotic 2-tier wage system that they ended up getting a number of years ago. And remember, the 90s, it was all the rage for corporate America to push these 2-tier wage systems. The idea being, hey, you guys are here now, we'll take care of you, you'll be fine, but screw the unborn. The people of the future, don't worry about them, be for yourself. And I remember back then going, hey, this is a bad idea, because you're eventually going to get to a point of divide and conquer. You're eventually going to get to a split in your facility that's going to cause this kind of tension, and this is where they are. Understand, this was something that was really forced upon the union, really forced upon these workers, because they didn't have, at the time, as we found out, the ability to make the Memphis, Tennessee plant go out on strike after having been locked out for, I think it's almost a year, is what someone told me. So they did this, the company did this strategically. Understand, these companies hire really, really smart people to figure out how to cause as much chaos as possible with their union workforce, which is bizarre to me, because you think, yeah, we all we should all be rowing in the same direction. We all want the same thing. Because people get surprised when I go, the company I work for, I want them to be profitable. I want them to be wildly profitable. I want them to get as much as they can possibly get out of my labor, because I want some of it back. And there are some people who go, really? A union member who says we want companies to be profitable? We want efficiency? Yeah, of course. Duh. Because ultimately, the better the company does, the better the workers do. Here's the problem. The problem is most working people in this country haven't been able to share in that. Haven't. The last 45 years, we've seen skyrocketing profits. We've seen, shareholders wealthier than they've ever could have imagined. And they've gotten it off the backs of stagnant wages and declining benefits. And it's all of this corporate attack on the worker. And right now we've got, a little over 10% of the workforce in this country in unions. In the private sector, just over 6%. So what corporate America understands is the longer they can push these strikes, the more pain they can push on these workers who are finally said, hey, we've had enough. And look, the stories of the people that I talked to today on that picket line, almost identical. Look, we came through the pandemic. We were working like crazy every day, putting ourselves and our families at risk because we believed we were feeding America. We were getting America breakfast. And that's what they saw. You're patriots, you're heroes, you're essential, you're all of this stuff. You're great. Oh, we love you. Didn't give them any more dignity in wage or benefits. No, just lots of words and lots of platitudes, some posters, but nothing in their paycheck. And now they're going, hey, look, we want equality in the workplace. This isn't even about the people who have been the longest saying we want more. This is about saying, hey, we need to close this gap. And because here's what's going on. They can't keep people. They can't get people to come and do the job and stay and work the hours and the weird shifts and all that stuff because, well, the money isn't there. And what ends up happening is the people who have been there a while, who are doing pretty well, they're then left to work, 16-hour days. And at some point, the money no longer matters because you just want time to see your family. You just want to see your kids. You don't want to wake up one day and that infant that you brought home in your arms is now, carrying their own infant. And you have missed that whole period. And this is the theme that I kept getting from people over and over and over again, which is why they are taking this stand. And it was great to see the Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, out on that picket line. To me, it shows that the administration, at least, the Department of Labor, is strongly behind workers in their right to organize and their right to bargain and their right to strike. In fact, Marty Walsh took pictures and walked the picket line with people, answered questions, was very nice. And it was good to see. Now, the question then becomes, where's this going to lead? Ultimately, it's going to have to come back to the bargaining table. And sadly, we're in a moment where corporate America is playing the long game. They in the back of their mind know that this moment right now that we're living through, where the last poll I saw, 74% of working people support the strikes that are going on. They know eventually that turns. They know come Christmas time when they can't get the G.I. Joe with Kung Fu grip or whatever the latest toy is. When you can't get Christmas dinner, or you can't get the turkeys or whatever. They know that they can flip the script. They can go, see, it's all those greedy workers. It's all those greedy people who wanted to make a living. It's all those greedy people who wanted time with their family. It's all those greedy. It's their fault. Blame them, not us. Not us. The New York Times did a piece the other day on why our supply chain is so broken. And why we're having these shortages and why things are going on. And not once in the article did they mention the possibility that in a capitalist system, taking advantage of a crisis and maybe holding back a little bit so that you could artificially raise prices while blaming, it's the pandemic's fault. It's not our fault. No. That didn't even enter into their possibility that this could be just pure opportunism. Nope, wasn't even in the cards, wasn't a thought. And I got to tell you, some of the shortages that we're seeing, I kind of think, yeah. And also this moment, there is no question that as profitable as Kellogg has been, there is no question that as profitable as these companies are, that they cannot share the wealth by doing just the simple things. I don't think it's even extreme what the workers at Kellogg's are asking for. I would be asking for more. They want to close that gap. They want to make it to where at some point, everyone gets to that top rate. Everyone is equal. I don't think that's too much to ask. But going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially with the backdrop of what happened today. And this is most concerning to me. This is something that I'm quite angry about. This is something that I'm quite concerned about, and I'm now looking at Secretary of Labor Walsh, and I wish I would have seen this while I was standing next to him, so I could have asked him the simple question. But as of right now, and we've had people on the program from Warrior Met Coal who have been on strike since April 1st. 1,100 coal miners down in Alabama who, while the company was struggling, while they were on the verge of bankruptcy, gave up massive concessions so that the company would be able to survive, to thrive, and then with the agreement that once they're back to somewhat solvency, once they're back to profitability, that some of that wealth would come back to them. I don't think that's too outrageous. Well, Warrior Met Coal is back to profitable. They've made some massive profits. And the workers are simply saying, hey, you promised us that if we sacrificed, and we did, that you would return some of the things that we lost. Now, anybody who's ever worked for a place where they've clawed back wages, where they've made your health care worse, where they've destroyed your pensions, just like anybody else, that you don't get that back. And look, I know people who've worked in different places where, hey, we need a 10% pay reduction to help us get through. We need to do something with healthcare to lower our costs. And people, you sacrifice. They tighten the belt, go, okay, with the understanding that once things get back to somewhat normal, that maybe they get that back. Never happens. Where does it go? It goes to the executives. The CEO lines his pocket. The CFO lines their pocket. And right on down the list. The board of directors, they're all giddy and happy. It's the working people who continually get screwed. So these workers, back on April 1st, said, you know what? We're going on strike. Going to happen. And all 1,100 of them in a right-to-work state like Alabama. None of them crossed the picket line. Out on the picket line. Well, immediately, Warrior Met Coal brings in scabs. And it's a contentious line. There are numerous videos of scabs crossing the picket lines, hitting the striking workers with their cars. There's all kinds of stuff. And I argue, as I always have, that this is what the company wants. This is the Jay Gould, I can pay half the working class to murder the other half. This is that in action. Because they're paying scabs to come across the picket line to break the strike, to break the union. That's the reason they do it. And understand, scabs, if you're thinking of scabbing, understand, they don't want you either. Nobody wants a scab. They're using you like a tool, and as soon as things are over, to the curb you go. Because you're a scab. Nobody wants you around. And I've seen that play out in a number of places, in a number of times. As it should. But what happened today is the Circuit Court of Tuscaloosa County, Alabama, issued an injunction that said that all pickets will be suspended within 300 yards of any Warrior Met entrance. They said any picketers for the evening shift, any picketers for the day tomorrow can't be there, because as of right now, if you are found to be within 300 feet of an entrance to Warrior Met Coal, you will be held in contempt of court. They have effectively, this judge has effectively, if this gets to stand, this judge has effectively broken the strike and effectively lost those guys and those women what they have been fighting for. Because the company now has no disincentive at all. They have no incentive to sit down and bargain because their gates are wide open and there's no more attention being drawn to them. This is why the courts matter. So every union member in this country, understand. And this is why I've said for the longest time to my Trump supporting friends, be careful of who you vote for, especially in the presidential election, because they're the ones who choose the judges. And everyone's all thrilled and tingly in the panties that Trump got to appoint a whole bunch of judges because Mitch McConnell was able to block and to stop Obama's appointments. Well, these are all anti-union judges. So any union member that hears this, and I know a bunch of people who think their next contract could be an issue, they could go on strike because they want more, they want better conditions, they want some of the things that were taken from them. This could happen to you. This could be what happens to all working people who decide, hey, we're going on strike. You could have a judge effectively cut you off. Sorry. You can have your rights to assemble somewhere else. You can have your First Amendment somewhere else. Not here in the place where the fight is. This is what happens when you have a corporate court. And I've been saying for the longest time, our Supreme Court is not a conservative court. It is a corporate court. At the end of the day, corporate America wins overwhelmingly. In fact, someone did a study not too long ago that said, now this was before, Amy COVID Barrett did a study a couple years ago saying, in cases that the Chamber of Commerce puts an amicus brief in, they win like 75% of the time. Think about that. The power of corporate money. And this is important because this is taking that right to strike away. Yeah, you've got the right to strike. Sure, you can do it, but we're going to block you from being able to do it effectively. We're going to put you in a free speech zone. I'm waiting for this because we already saw the injunction in Iowa at the John Deere plant where they limited the number. Oh, you can only have 4 people. And I've seen this happen too. You can only have 4 people on a picket line where the entrance to the place is 100 yards long, knowing that it's not going to matter. And you go, but Rick, why is it important? Well, it's important because ultimately, and like it or not, strikes are about disrupting the operation of the company, shutting things down. It's about getting their attention. Nobody ever wants to go on strike. I've done it, didn't want to, but had to. Didn't have a choice. It was literally the last arrow in the quiver. It was the last thing we wanted to do, but had to. And I tell people today, in '94, the freight industry went on, the LTL trucking industry went on strike. All of the national master freight companies went on strike. And the issue was they wanted to take all of the dock jobs that were full-time jobs, good wages, good benefits, good retirement, all of that. They wanted to take that and turn those into part-time casual jobs where we just bring in an army of 4-hour people and you would never get full-time status. Basically destroying a pathway to the middle class. And I'm proud of the fact that we went on strike for that because it could have been easy. It could have been easy to go, you know what? I'll take the extra dollar. Give me an extra $1 an hour in my paycheck. The heck with the people down the road. I'm proud of the fact that we did that. Did it hurt? Yeah, it did. Losing a month's pay? Sure. And then, the months after that of diminished pay? Certainly. But sometimes you have to. And the fact that, nothing got in and nothing got out. You have to sit. Strikes are the most extreme thing for a reason. Because you want both sides to be at the table. You want both sides to sit down and negotiate to end it. What this judge has done, they've either prolonged it indefinitely for these workers, or he's completely lost it. And that's infuriating. Now, for me, what I hope to see tomorrow morning, I'd love to see 1,000 people who live in Alabama marching on that picket line. 1,000 people who don't work for Warrior Met Coal. 1,000 citizens saying, no, we stand with our brothers and sisters who work here. We stand with their right to organize, their right to collectively bargain, and the right to strike. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1933. That was the day Detroit anarchist labor leader Joseph Labadie died. Born in Paw Paw in 1850, Joe was born to descendants of French immigrants and grew up among native Potawatomi peoples in southwest Michigan. He became a printer, joining the local typographical union number 18, and worked for the Detroit Post and Tribune. He was an early leader of the Socialist Labor Party. By 1878, Joe organized the first Knights of Labor Assembly in Detroit. He served as the first president of the Detroit Trades Council and founded the Michigan Federation of Labor. He wrote tirelessly for a number of labor and socialist newspapers across the country. He embraced anarchism and soon produced a popular column titled Cranky Notions. Labadie enjoyed the company and correspondence of radical labor leaders like Emma Goldman, Albert and Lucy Parsons, Eugene V. Debs, Benjamin Tucker, Terence Powderly, and others of the progressive era. He was often referred to as the gentle anarchist for his insistence on nonviolence and distancing from those anarchists who advocated the use of violence as an acceptable tactic. Labadie was also known to never throw out any printed material relevant to labor or radical causes. His biographer, Carletta Anderson, notes that the story of his life deeds, and thoughts is abundantly revealed through the treasure trove of letters, periodicals, clippings, manuscripts, booklets, photos, and circulars once stored in his attic and now housed in the Labate collection of the University of Michigan. His stockpile of documents of social protest has proven a boon to scholars, enabling them to study the early labor movement in detail. When he died at the age of 83, he considered this to be his legacy.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said, it was good to see Marty Walsh out on the picket line there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, marching with the striking Kellogg's workers. And look, this administration, as many have said, has been the most pro-union in many of our lifetimes. I would like to see them a little more. I would like to see a little more action. But the question is, how far can you go? I'm here to share some thoughts on that line. I've asked Rebecca Rainey to come talk with us. She's the employment and immigration reporter over at Politico Pro. She's got a piece out today. Biden walks line between appeasing unions, bosses amid wave of strikes. Rebecca, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm looking at this moment as, you know, as a labor guy going, hey, there's some pretty good press happening around the strikes that are happening. There's a sense of militancy within the labor movement that I haven't seen in a number of years. It'd be nice if we had laws that back some of that up. But, you know, Biden, to me, has been one of the most pro-union presidents, at least of my lifetime. But he does have a tough line to walk, doesn't he?
Yes, that's very true. And I think you're right. You know, Joe Biden has campaigned on and honestly, from the actions that he can take from the executive branch, has really delivered on being one of the most pro-labor presidents we've seen in modern history, for sure. However, you know, some of those broader labor reforms that you're talking about, you know, things like Democrats protecting the right to organize act, things that would make it much easier for workers to join together in unions, seem to have a much, you know, more difficult path forward on Capitol Hill, just given, you know, the narrow margins. The same things that are holding up the infrastructure package right now. You know, you see even moderate Democrats, you know, gumming up that process. It's the same thing with labor reform. You know, people are a little frightened of upsetting the business community, you could say, in the simplest terms.
No, absolutely, because they could literally crash our economy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you look at what's going on, you know, they're used to being in control. And if they don't get their way, who knows what comes out of this, what disinvestment comes. And I look, you know, today I'm infuriated at this judge down in Alabama who has basically shut off picketing at this Warrior Met coal because this is what corporate America can do. This is the kind of power that they're now ready, willing, and used to wielding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, during, you know, what we've been seeing, all this movement, all of this strike activity and worker militancy we've been seeing this month, you know, which has been dubbed on social media as Striketober, I think really comes at a time where, you know, we've been dealing with this pandemic for almost 2 years now. And you look at the jobs that are out there, even just for average people, and $15 even as a starting wage, and that's high for a lot of places, just doesn't seem like enough.
Nope.
So it makes sense why workers right now, you know, you mentioned Warrior Met Coal, what we're seeing at John Deere, Kellogg, the fact that companies are considering cutting benefits and reducing wages right now seems like a slap in the face, considering that we've gotten through, you know, nearly 24 months of this completely new world that the pandemic has created. So I think that is really what's driving people to use the leverage that they legally have. You know, striking is a legally protected right under the National Labor Relations Act. I always love to remind people that, you know, bargaining for your working conditions is legally protected. So I think people are starting to really kind of fall back into places where, you know, people, you know, using these measures and walking out of the job and taking riskier moves to, you know, really say, hey, we're not going to deal with this anymore in the workplace.
Yeah, for now, all of that is protected. I mean, the reality is I look at this decision by this judge in Alabama to shut that picket line down. We used to have the right to strike, and we'll see how this plays out in the coming days. But to your point about, during the pandemic, I was on the picket line today in Lancaster, with the striking Kellogg workers, and, they kept telling the same story. During the pandemic, we were essential, we were heroes, we were feeding America, we were patriotic. Granted, we were putting our lives and our families' lives at risk while working, excessive overtime. But they told us we were all these things, and yet, we simply want equality in the workplace. We want to close the two-tier wage system so that the people coming in can enjoy the standard of living that we had. And oh, by the way, maybe they'll stay so I don't get stuck working, mandatory overtime every day too. It seems like they just want a better life-work balance and better for workers of the future, which I don't think is a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, this disruption that we saw from the pandemic, we're not supposed to use this word in journalism, unprecedented, but it literally, across industries, really just disrupted the labor market. And for some people, they didn't have the security that they did. It makes sense that people are willing to put their jobs at risk, because that's what the reality is when it comes to a strike, to say, hey, we need more security at work. We are worth more than this. Especially just after, again, the past 24 months that we've had, with so many people either literally dying. We've lost, again, 600,000 people. I've had a lot of economists point, when we talk about the labor shortage, we've lost 600,000 people in the United States. Now, granted, some of those are children, elderly people who weren't in the labor market, but that is a huge, huge piece of the labor force.
Yeah, last I checked, it was like 760,000.
Yes, it's probably higher at this point. I'm sorry, I haven't checked in a minute, but exactly. Things, the dynamic and risks that are happening in the workplace, and that the everyday worker now has to deal with, really make wages worth less than they were prior to this pandemic. Going back to your point about some of these people who were on strike who were called, heroes earlier on in this pandemic, things haven't changed. We're still in the throes of the Delta virus, and it's wild to me that companies can say, okay, you're worth an extra $5 now because you're putting your life at risk, but now that things have calmed down a little bit, we have some solutions. You're not worth as much anymore because we can give you a mask and make sure you have a vaccine, and it's less risky for us. And, I don't think that's enough for people anymore.
No, I think there has been an awakening on a certain level. But, here's the thing. We hear the Striketober stuff, especially on social media. We see in media reports how, strike militancy and strike activity is up. Is it really up given past years? Because I've actually sat down and started to think about this, because I was going along too. Wow, there are a lot of big strikes going on. There's a lot of publicity, a lot of news coverage right now. And my mindset is I'm in this spot where going, I don't know that it was as much as it's been in past years. It's just that we're now paying attention to it more. And my fear is, the other side of this, is that, come, the next couple of months down the road, when you can't get your stuff, at Christmas time, the script gets flipped and goes, well, it's those greedy workers. They're the reason you can't get anything. It was their fault. They didn't go to work. I just see so many weird things coming in the future of this. But to the first question, are there more strikes now than there were in the past?
Now, yes, first of all, you're so right with all the things you just said. But no, the answer really is we are seeing, a below average year when it comes to strike activity. And granted, there's some things we need to think about here. Last year with the coronavirus, we saw mass layoffs. Some people just didn't even have jobs at, one of the unions that I work with a lot, Unite Here, which represents hospitality workers, 90% of their members were laid off during the pandemic. So there was a lot of workers who just literally didn't have, their jobs to leverage against, basically. So this year, we are seeing a lot more activity now that the labor market has tightened up. People are reopening their businesses. They want workers. But again, we're talking about, workers are expecting a lot more from their workplace given the risks that the pandemic kind of unveiled. So this whole Striketober thing, the way I like to kind of describe it is a groundswell. It's kind of, it is not historical in size, but it is historical in just the, sheer amount of things happening all at once. And I definitely think it's catching people's attention, as you mentioned, right ahead of the holiday season, because workers, again, are using this unique time regarding, the need for more workers to help deal with the increases in demand that come from the holiday season, and workers knowing that and using that to help in, I guess, boosting their argument here for getting, better working conditions.
That, and this is when their contracts came up, and this is the time you got to do something. And as I say, strikes are the last arrow in the quiver. Nobody wants to do it, and the fact that people I talked to on the picket line today at Kellogg's, they don't want to be on strike. They want to be able to go to work, but they don't want to work under the conditions that they've been working under for the last several years, and they certainly don't want to have the two-tier wage system. So they now is the time that they have to right this ship. Now, what we're seeing is a lot of activity in the unionized part of things. The other part that I've been saying is we've been seeing a lot of people who've had enough. And the fact that we've only got 10% union density and 6.4% in the private sector, we've now got the Great Resignation, Rebecca. The Great Resignation should be all of those strikes that aren't happening. If all of those workers had the ability to go on strike and to bargain collectively in their workplace, maybe they wouldn't be quitting. Maybe they'd be striking.
That's a really, really interesting way to put it. And you're right. Labor laws in the United States haven't been updated for decades, and the last time they were updated, they were updated to make it harder for people to unionize and to police unions and put limits on how people organize. So I think it's a really unique time because people really were put through the ringer this past year, 2 years. They really, people literally were putting their lives at risk and their families at risk because you didn't know what you were bringing home. And some people didn't have the choice. I was lucky enough to be able to work from home during the pandemic because I'm a journalist. But some people literally have to make the choice every day, and whether they were going to, be potentially exposed to the virus every day. And so, again, I think you're right. If labor laws were different, I think people would be using their leverage in a different way. You're right. We wouldn't be seeing it in quits. We'd be seeing it more, again, in this kind of worker militancy.
Yeah, at least that's my view on it. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Rebecca Rainey. She's the employment and immigration reporter over at Politico Pro. You can check out her work. We'll get links out on social media. You can also follow her at Rebecca A. Rainey on Twitter. We'll make sure that folks do that as well. Now, I look at this moment, and look, Joe Biden wasn't my first choice. But I think he was a good choice. I like Joe Biden. I think he is a good union guy. I think he wants to do the right thing. But clearly, I don't know that he has much power in these moments. What do you think the expectations should be from people going? Because we're going to hear, the attacks against him. So he's not doing anything. How much can he do you think?
That's really the point that the White House is kind of making, and the fact that Joe Biden is staying out of this. They also argue this is really up to the workers. Maybe if the workers don't fully support a union, maybe the union isn't the best decision for that workplace. They've really, really honed in on the fact that it is the workers in that workplace's right to choose whether they want to form a union. So, again, it does really vary issue by issue, or in workplace by workplace. But when we look back to what Joe Biden did in the Bessemer, Alabama, Amazon union drive, he still reminded workers that they had the right to form a union, that they had the right to vote, to participate in this process, and collectively bargain if they wanted to.
Right.
And, if you are truly, purely, reading the National Labor Relations Act, it does say, it talks about workers' freedom to, join a union or not join a union. So he is kind of being a purist in that sense, and, saying, hey, go out there and exercise your right to vote, whether or not you support the union. By the way, unions tend to, have higher wages, safer workplaces, and when you look at the data, it shows that, unionized workplaces had less layoffs than non-unionized workplaces during the pandemic. So, he does kind of it's almost like a quasi-endorsement. He's like, exercise your right to join a union. By the way, there's all these benefits that come from it, but it's up to you. Which is honestly the most pro-labor stance a president has taken in modern history.
No, absolutely. I'm right there with you. But ultimately, saying that is one thing, and the other part of it is I would love to believe that's possible in this country, but having been a part of numerous organizing drives over the years and seeing what employers get away with, there's part of me that goes, I think I would like some law changes to stop some of the real egregious stuff, like the stuff we saw during the Amazon campaign of all the captive audience meetings, all of the plastering the bathrooms with anti-union messaging, bringing the ballot box into the facility and having the postal service drop a box in there and training cameras on it so they can follow you. I mean, I think we should be looking at that stuff too. And this is where I'm hoping that Marty Walsh and the NLRB and the administration does something.
Yeah. And again, the PRO Act, which would ban a lot of these things that we're talking about, and something that you mentioned, I just want to bring up, the whole mailbox issue is the subject of an NLRB unfair labor practice complaint right now that may be overturning that unsuccessful union election there. So that may have been illegal activity, but the PRO Act also would ban, things that you talked about, those captive audience meetings, forcing workers to go to anti-union meetings during their working hours, things like that. So if Democrats were able to pass this labor overhaul legislation, we would see some big changes. It would also allow for things like secondary pickets, which means it would make it a lot easier for workers to strike. We could see more strike activity like we are seeing during this, Striketober action.
Yep. No, I'm all in favor of it.
Yeah, but, the reality is, I think we're going to see the most changes from the National Labor Relations Board. President Joe Biden has put in a lot of, very, very close union allies in those positions. I wrote about this a few months ago. That actually may get them in trouble. Some of their affiliations with, the SEIU and the Fight for 15 issue they're dealing with McDonald's. A lot of these, members were very close in that effort or even represented the SEIU in those cases. So that may be a place for hiccups, but, for people who are watching the labor movement, the NLRB, I think, is going to really be the place where we see consistent changes. And while those changes are going to happen on a case-by-case basis, little strokes spell great oaks.
Yeah, there you go. Good stuff. And I'd love to have you come back and share some thoughts on that in the coming weeks and months. Rebecca, I appreciate the time. Great stuff. I hope folks will take a look at the article. We'll get links out on social media. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. Rebecca Rainey, employment and immigration reporter there at Politico Pro. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1948. That was the day that a thick yellow fog rolled over the town of Donora, Pennsylvania, just south of Pittsburgh. Donora was a mill town, nestled in a valley on the banks of the Monongahela River. By 1948, the town had grown to 14,000 people who came to work in the town's steel mills and the Donora Zinc Works. For years, the local residents had complained about the pollution that spilled from the plants. Smog was a regular occurrence, but this fog was even worse than usual. A layer of cold air was trapping a noxious blend of nitrogen dioxide, sulfuric acid, and fluoride pollution. 24 hours passed and still the fog grew denser. The police and local doctors began to receive reports of people having difficulty breathing. The fog had become so thick that residents could not see to drive. For 5 days, the smog hung over the town until a rain began to break it up. Nearly half of the town's residents became ill. 20 died. U.S. Steel refused to take blame for the fog, even though they continued to run the plant as the deadly toxins continued to build. According to a 2010 article by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, despite the efforts of industry to cast the tragedy as an act of God, the fatalities in Donora received national attention. The event changed the way air pollution was viewed, moving it rapidly from an aesthetic issue to a public health concern, and spurred local, state, and federal officials to control toxic air pollution. In 2008, a smog museum opened with the motto, "Clean air starts here." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So tragedy struck today. A worker at John Deere was heading to the picket line and was struck on the highway and killed at the parts distribution center there in Milan, Illinois. And you know, this is one of those things where you go, just heartbreaking, but avoidable. This strike didn't have to happen. If the employer were to come to the table and negotiate and address some of the concerns, maybe we wouldn't be in this position. But sadly, this person at 6 a.m. this morning lost their life on the highway, just trying to get to the picket line and join his fellow workers. And it's heartbreaking. But here's the thing: the fight and the battle goes on. And I wish the best for the folks there. But, you know, John Deere is one of those places. 10,000 workers across the country have said, you know what, we're going to close this two-tier wage system one way or another. And they've taken to the picket line to do it. And here to share some thoughts on what's going on there, because he was at their big rally on Saturday. I've asked J.D. Scholten to come talk with us. J.D. is the executive director of ruralvote.org, obviously their website, ruralvote.org. J.D., thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, pleasure being back, and my heart goes out to that worker and his family, and it just, exactly, it was avoidable, and what we see happening across, a lot of it's happening here in the Midwest and in Iowa, on the other side of the state, but still, there's something happening out there, and I'm eager to talk about that today.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things, JD, where we're starting to see people who are kind of saying, hey, I've had enough of what's happening. And there's a lot of anger. And look, I look at Trump being elected as a sign of anger, of a working class, that their issues have not been addressed for so long. And they're looking for something, anything. I say this all the time. A drowning man will grab onto an anchor if because he thinks it might save him. And it's not going to. But you grab onto what's there. And this is where I think Democrats have an opportunity. And labor is that place. I say it all the time. On election night in 2020, I began leading a strike, 55 striking workers here in our area. Fight all you want. The righteous fight is for better wages, hours, conditions.
Amen. And I think you're exactly right. I think so many people were deemed essential during COVID, and yet they're not getting paid what they deserve. But then there's two sides to this. You got the worker side. You also have, and you look back 100 years ago when we had the first kind of huge wave of the labor movement. You also had the other part of it that was the antitrust side. And so, like, when you have corporations like John Deere, who they sell twice as much equipment than their next two competitors combined. That part of market power, they can just store money offshore. They can they do all these things. They get money from the state of Iowa. They get about $16 billion a year from the state of Iowa. And it's one of those things where, do they use that money to go back to the workers? No. They use it. Since 2010, they spent $16 million lobbying Congress. And so it's just all this stuff adds up and it's boiling over. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, especially here in Iowa.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, I say we are reliving the last 100 years, and sadly, my children are going to have to fight the battles of their grandparents and their great grandparents because we're back kind of in that robber baron era. Inequality in this country has never been greater than it is right now. Fortunately, we have some social safety net programs that dull the edges of that pain, but we're still more equal than we've ever been in this country, JD.
We are living in the second Gilded Age, and that is clear as day. What we're seeing with the technology and Facebook and all that stuff, it goes over into this. In agriculture, every sector of agriculture, whether you're on the input side and seed and fertilizer, whether you're on the market side with processing, in the processing plants, every sector has monopolies, multinational corporations that are dictating what's happening on the farm. But it goes beyond that. It's the wealth that is getting taken out of our rural communities. Where I'm from, we haven't bounced back since the 2008 economic crisis. And that's the big thing. When we had the caucus here in Iowa and all the presidential candidates coming through, that's the point that I wanted to make sure everyone understood was like, okay, I know the economy is boosting for like Des Moines and Chicago, Minneapolis, like the bigger cities. There's a lot of thriving going on there economically, but that's not everywhere. And it is definitely becoming a difference between the have and the have-nots when it comes to the economy.
No, and it's still that fight between the rural and the urbans. You know, I get this all the time, and sadly, rural communities have been left behind by a lot of policy, especially when the factory goes away. Or you know, last week we had David Pepper, the former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party, on, and he had gone to a town in Ohio where the factory left, and the town is abandoned. It's a quarter of the population it once was. Now it's got all of the negative opioid addiction problems, broken families, all of the stuff, alcoholism, all of the things that you expect once the main employer goes away, and no policy to replace it. And the worst part yet, a representative who, when the citizens went to and said, hey, what are you going to do to help us, basically told them to move. I mean, it's crazy where we are.
And we're seeing that across, like, there was a study done in Minnesota, but it relates to here to Iowa too, that in 5 years, a small town won't even have a local grocery store. Dollar Generals are coming here. Their workers get paid $8-9 an hour in dangerous conditions because there's only 1 or 2 people on staff at a time. That's been well documented. And they don't sell fresh meat or fresh produce. And it's just, what are we doing in this society? Like, where I'm from is the second most agriculture producing district in America. And we only have 2 farm-to-table restaurants. We have 90% of the food that we consume in the state of Iowa is imported. And so you wonder, like, who are we doing this for? And meanwhile, multinational corporations have come here and just sucked the wealth out of these communities. And to me, I mean, that's why I decided to run for Congress back in 2018 and to do something about it. I got to a point where you come back and you see these small towns that are just shells of what they used to be. And then when you have food insecurity and you have unhealthy food, and then you have these addictions that kind of come with all of that, and this despair, it's definitely a tale of the haves and the have-not in this country, and that's what I'm really focused on.
And this is why, you know, I talk about politics so much. You know, people say, I don't want to talk about politics. No, the political arena is how we got into this mess, and it's how I think we have to get out of it. We need to elect people who understand what you said. We need the next Teddy Roosevelt. We need the next trust buster. We need the next Franklin Roosevelt to bring in policies that are going to help average, everyday working people. We've got 2 parties, and I'm sorry to say this, but we've got one party solidly in the pocket of corporate America, and a pretty good portion of the other one in their pocket as well. Corporate America gets what they want. We're seeing this playing out every day, and I think the average worker gets that. Where's the way forward? Who's going to help us move to some bit of sanity in this day?
You know, that's one thing that during bringing it back to the caucus and pushing all these presidential candidates to talk about these very direct issues, these kitchen table topics, and just like showing what's happening, the reality of what's happening in this economy. I really appreciate when Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, mentioned, like, if you could pass one bill, what would it be? It's campaign finance reform. And because that dictates everything. If you got money out of politics, then all these corporations couldn't have their influence over it. And one thing that I'm the executive director for ruralvote.org, but my other project I work at, I'm a senior advisor for the American Economic Liberties Project, which is an antitrust think tank out of DC. And the thing that I'm so proud of working with them is that is where the fight is at right now. It is just balancing the level. I mean, we talk about, not only is this an economic issue, this is about our democracy. You look at the history of this country, and the Boston Tea Party was a rejection of the monopoly that was the East India Trading Company.
Right.
We had the battle when the workers were fighting to get organized 100 years ago. We had the same battle when it come to antitrust. And you look at when we all like to talk about the middle class in the 50s and 60s. Well, that was strong unions, and it was enforcing our antitrust laws. And we've had 4 decades of consolidation. And I mean, say what you want about President Biden, but like, one of the things that I am so proud that he has taken on, he's the first president in my lifetime that has talked about the competition in our economy, and he had an executive order on this, which is one of the biggest game changers. Now, is that going to solve everything? No, but when we enforce our antitrust laws, that's the first step in the right direction in so many of these issues, and workers' rights is at the top.
No, I'm right there with you. And look, we're so busy fighting over the nonsense issues that we lose these big, and this is exactly where, honestly, where the wealthy in corporate America wants us. They want us eating each other and fighting each other. As Jay Gould said, you could easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. That's going on, and nobody's getting paid because we're doing it anyway. For me, this is where the organizing has to happen. So, as you're out talking to people, across the political spectrum, do they get this? Or are we still, when you talk about this, are we still in our camps?
So I think both. So when I went out and for the last 4 years, I ran for Congress back-to-back times in 2018 and 2020, I talked about antitrust nonstop. And I had farmers and workers who would never vote for me, and ones who would always vote for me, and everywhere in between. And when I talked about antitrust, I never got pushed back on, because they know I'm right. And I think it's something that does cross party lines, because it's not just a black-white issue.
Right.
But that being said, what we often, and you mentioned this, we tend to get brought up cultural issues. And the thing, when I got presented cultural issues, I said, this is something that's meant to divide us. But at the end of the day, it's not left versus right. It's so much, it's up versus down. And so much of the Republican side looks at down and saying the people below you are the people that are a problem to this country. And when in reality, it's the people above you making all the decision and all the money that's dictating what's happening.
No, and I look at this Build Back Better plan. There is nothing in this plan that is horribly liberal, left, far, extreme socialist. There's none of that. There's getting Granny some glasses. There's paying for early childhood education so kids get an opportunity to get a head start. There was 2 years of additional schooling at the end of high school, which I think in this moment, with the technological advances in the world we live in, is an imperative. We have to have it. There's all kinds of stuff in there for the social safety net that has been tattered for the last 40 years and is wildly popular, which is why we're not going to get any of
it. that's you're exactly right. All these policies, when it just comes to policies, the Democratic Party is on the right side of these things at like 70%, a lot of these things. And if we pass this, and even just a shell of what it is, but I hope they don't. That'd just be crushing. But like, if they do pass this, this is going to be one of the largest investments in rural America that we've seen since the New Deal. And I can't express what type of game-changing opportunities this is. Will this be immediate? Probably not, but the opportunity for what can happen is going to be pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, well, especially on the broadband access level. I mean, just that alone is something we desperately need. And And it's remarkable that we haven't gotten to this point. So the question then comes, what you do as executive director of ruralvote.org is get people who are going to run for office in rural areas, kind of like where I live in a very rural red area. This is a 65-35 area. Republicans dominate. But I think you have to fight in these districts. I think you have to talk about all of the issues that we've been talking about. Because look, even Republicans come along, like you said, on antitrust, on the massive corporate power, and then the monopolies that we're seeing. I think you have to fight those fights.
Oh, absolutely. And so that's actually one thing, a great segue is on November 6th, ruralvote.org is hosting a national rural strategy session. So we have grassroots groups from across the nation who are looking to improve Democratic performance. And what I get frustrated in the Democratic Party is they look at a place like your area and where I live, and they're like, oh, we can't win there. We're not going to invest money in there. But when we look about how are we going to win the Senate? Everyone talks about Manchin and Sinema, but if we had enough senators there, we wouldn't have to worry about them. And that's the reality. And the Democratic Party does not understand the skew and the biasness of the rural vote. And so that's one thing that we're trying to do is really push that.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Iowa. Iowa used to be a solidly Democratic state. Tom Harkin was an incredible labor senator, one of the best people I ever met and had the chance to interview. And we've lost that guy.
Exactly. He an absolute hero of mine. And yeah, that's exactly right. We went from this proudly purple state to this ruby red state. And I like to tell folks that we are geographically between Wisconsin and South Dakota, and politically we're about the same. And I think this election cycle, this 2022, is really going to show which way we're going to go.
So nuts and bolts of it. If someone wants to run in one of these areas because it is an uphill climb,
Right.
What advice do you first give them?
The first thing I would do is make sure that you're not alone in this, because I think a lot of candidates are pretty gung-ho. Running for federal office is a complete grind, but the first thing I do, what I did was I had a vision. I had certain dates and just made a timeline of, okay, I want to make sure I talk to this many people, travel to this many communities, and raise this much money initially. And I think when you have a timeline like that right away, it really puts you on a trajectory of, okay, can I make this or can I not? And in 2018, we went from absolutely nothing to moving the needle 24 points, which was the third most in the nation. And
wow. Good on you.
Yeah.
Why didn't you run again?
I did, and then Representative Steve King lost his primary and the Trump wave, and it just, in 2020, it didn't work out in our favor.
No, that's all excellent advice. And of course, go to ruralvote.org. Plenty of resources for candidates and folks to get involved. And also the main piece of advice that I always give people who are going to run in this area is you better find some thick skin.
You know what? Go and talk to everybody.
Yep.
The majority of people are willing to listen. There's definitely a passionate people that will never ever vote for you. And you know what? Don't waste your time with them. Go and talk to people, change the world. More people agree with you than you would think.
There you go. J.D. Scholten, I appreciate the time. Executive Director of ruralvote.org. Make sure you check out that website. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. J.D., thanks so much. I appreciate it.
It's an honor to be back.
Good stuff. I'd love to have him on. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1951. That was the day that the United Negro Labor Council held its founding convention. African American workers had made significant gains in the American workforce during World War II. The National March on Washington movement, led by A. Philip Randolph, had led President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to sign an executive order desegregating war industry jobs. But as the war ended, these gains slowed, and in some cases, practices were even reversed. In 1950, 900 African Americans gathered in Chicago to discuss the problem. They decided to form a new organization, specifically focused on issues of black employment. By the next year, 23 chapters of the United Negro Labor Council had been established throughout the country. More than 1,000 white and black labor activists attended that first convention in Cincinnati. 1/3 of the attendees were women. One of the first goals established by the organization was to get fair employment practice clauses into every union contract. The first person to speak at the convention was Vicki Garvin, one of the convention's lead planners. She declared, "We are making history today." But that history was cut short. The National Negro Labor Council faced accusations from the mainstream labor movement that it was a communist front. One of the organization's leaders, Coleman Young, was brought before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Young had worked for Ford prior to World War II, but lost his job due to his union activity. He fought in World War II as one of the Tuskegee Airmen. Coleman refused to give testimony against his fellow National Negro Labor Council members. Young would eventually go on to become the first black mayor of Detroit. But the National Negro Labor Council would be dissolved by the Red Scare, dissolving in 1956. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Tick, tick, tick. Each sweep of Big Tech's clock enhances corporate power, but his hands also sweep away more of our civil rights. At first, each new surge of artificial intelligence and robotic technologies can seem perfectly benign, even playful. Take Spot, the robotic four-legged doggy that actually has no spots, no endearing puppy eyes, can't bark, has no tail to wag, and is very undoggy. In fact, this electronic critter is rather creepily nightmarish, but it's marketed by cute videos, including one of Spot mixing margaritas. Admit it, that beats training your real dog to bring your slippers to you. But you can't just adopt a Spot at your local animal shelter. Each artificial canine, manufactured by Boston Dynamics, which is owned by Korean auto giant Hyundai Motor Company, sells for about $75,000. So who's buying them? Mainly such big corporate outfits as oil refineries, mining operations, and electric utilities that want an unblinking eye to monitor and record workers, visitors, protesters, and all others who approach their facilities. Just one more layer of our cycloptic surveillance society. But the point at which Spot loses all cuteness and turns into a menacing beast of authoritarianism is when it's turned into a police dog. There's been quite a public backlash, for example, against the Honolulu Police Department for deploying one of the robotic canines in a tent city for homeless people. In addition to outrage at the obvious class bias in sicking Spot on the homeless, the public outcry grew hotter when it was revealed that the police had used federal pandemic relief funds to buy their Spot. Corporate and government officials assure us that this latest tech marvel won't be used to spy on innocent people, be weaponized, or otherwise bite us on the butt. Trust us, they say. This is Jim Hightower saying no. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the headline I saw over at the AP, U.S.-China tensions evident as Biden heads to twin summits. And you go, yeah, there's some tensions here, man. You don't get to eat my lunch for years. You don't get to basically destroy our economy and not have any repercussions. And look, you know, the one thing that I agreed with Donald Trump on, tariffs on China. China is a problem, has to be dealt with. We have got to do better in reining them in. And look, is it China's fault? No, it's our fault. We're the stupid ones. And as we talked in the last segment with J.D. Scholten over, this is corporate America getting their way and it hurting us, we the people. And here to share some thoughts on, well, maybe how we deal with some of this and where we go. They've actually got a new piece out. The good folks over at Advisory Horizon, Footholds and Friction, China's European Steel Front. Sounds really wonky. And here to share the wonk with us, I've asked Emily de la Bruyere to come talk with us. She is the co-founder of Horizon Advisory. Emily, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having me.
So,
I think here to share the wonk with us might be my new bumper sticker.
Gonna bring the wonk. Because look, a lot of this stuff gets deep into the weeds. I read through the report, and at the end of it, I'm just scratching my head going, which is why you're here to explain it to me, because I need it broken down. Look, I understand the U.S.-China tensions, but then you bring Europe into this, because Europe, especially when we're talking about steel, is a big problem in this. If we lose our steel industry, we basically give up our national security. That's my mindset. Explain it to me.
So I'm not going to start with explaining why steel is important. We're going to take that as an assumption.
It's a given.
Because I really hope everyone listening recognizes that this is a given. We still have, or Washington, right, still has this idea that in trade policy, you can compete with a country's distortions or unfair practices. Really, you can compete with a country itself just by competing directly with that other country. So if the US wants to change what China's doing in terms of subsidizing its domestic steel and dumping and distorting the global industry, the US should just enact tariffs on China and focus, really keep China in its sights in terms of a responsive approach. That ignores the reality that we live in a globalized environment. And in a globalized environment, a country's resources, sources of power, competitive footholds extend well beyond its national borders. So China can use other countries and can use production presences and commercial partnerships in other countries in order to distort the global steel market,
right,
and extend its control over it and everything built on top of it. If the US, as the US has, says tomorrow, okay, we're going to limit or we're going to put tariffs on steel from China, then China can immediately start using other countries that don't have the same restrictive trade policies to ship its steel through.
right,
So that those look like they're coming from a third party. China calls this third country re-export. And there's a whole cottage industry of trade facilitators that support that practice. China can do that immediately. And what China can do next year is it can purchase facilities in or develop facilities in third-party countries and produce steel there, or at least add to produce steel there, such that it again looks like they're coming from these other footholds internationally. All of which is to say that we talk about whack-a-mole a lot when we talk about China, and if you just directly enforce trade measures on China, then Beijing's distortive presence is going to pop up somewhere else.
right.
Whether
And
that's
Vietnam,
Europe or whether that's
immediately my mind goes to Vietnam. It goes to other third world countries. But increasingly, what we're seeing is Europe being part of this as well, which is why we haven't, I guess, lifted the Section 232 tariffs off of Europe yet, which I guess is still part of the contention between us and them right now as well.
Exactly, and that's, needless to say, a big thing that European countries are pushing. But how can that be justified if Europe is allowing China to take advantage of its steel markets and to establish a distortive presence there? And Europe is a really, really key priority in China's industrial policy and strategic policy more broadly. Beijing sees it as the determinative battlefield for today's contest. So before the 232 conversation can be had, there needs to be, I argue, a come to Jesus moment with the European Union about what China is doing and how that influences global markets.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you got to know where your friends are, and if we're in this weird kind of world because, China has filled voids that the last administration left open. And look, they're buying their way into everything. I mean, the fact that the power that they have. I mean, I look at the fact that they made John Cena learn Mandarin Chinese to apologize for saying something about Taiwan. I'm going, it's crazy power. But this is how much they've been able to infiltrate, every aspect of life around the globe.
And they use that buying up of things as well as using the traditional national power. So as long as there's this standoff between China and the US, or China, the US, and Europe, that like keeps any player from really acting. And meanwhile, China's just buying everything up because it can do that at the same time, while other players are kind of stuck in their stalemate, which means that no action means China wins.
Right. No, absolutely. But what do you say to the person, Emily, who goes, that's capitalism. They're playing the game. They're using the rules of capitalism to their advantage, and we're not nimble enough, and we're not flexible enough, and we lose.
So first of all, I point out that they're breaking the rules of capitalism. Like, most of what they do goes against international trade law, and that's not playing by the rules. But I mean, you said at the very beginning when you introduced this segment, you said that it's not really China's fault, it's kind of our fault because we're dropping the ball. Like, so they're bending the rules, they're breaking the rules. That's what countries do if they're going to compete. But you know what countries don't do if they're going to compete? They don't just let that happen.
Right.
And we seem to have this idea that you just let other players do whatever they're going to do, and whoever wins, wins, as though it doesn't matter. And as though we don't care about our own national competitiveness, our national prosperity, our national security. And so, we should really care.
No, we should care. So let me ask you this then, because, clearly, the average everyday working person cares. But who benefits from the system that allows China to basically beat the snot out of the American worker? I would argue it's our global corporate heads who this is what they want. They see they see profit, they see access possibly someday, maybe down the road to the Chinese market, which I think that's one of those things that is never going to come for them. But they're seeing short-term gains. They're doing well while the rest of us are not.
Agree with you absolutely. And the one thing I would stress would be that short-term gain part. So they're thinking about their quarterly profits. And when they sell themselves to China, they are making quarterly profits. But this is not in the long-term interest of the American corporation or even the top executive in the American corporation. And in 5 years, this is going to mean that corporation is going to be underwater because a Chinese competitor will have used their resources to leapfrog it. We've seen it happen with American manufacturing. We're going to see it happen with American technology and capital players if we don't do anything about it. So yes, the current chief executive officer of a major US company, yes, they're profiting off of this. And yes, that company's shares might be profiting in the next 6 months, but ultimately, that CEO is abdicating his responsibility to his shareholders in the long term. And he's abdicating his responsibility to his company, and in the process, he's abdicating his responsibility to the United States.
Yeah, but ultimately, it seems like they're okay with it. I mean, the lobbying money is going into, to pushing towards, more with China. The messaging that I'm seeing, we shouldn't be inflaming the rhetoric with China. We should figure out how to make a deal. I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong. I don't think there's a deal to be made here. I don't think China will ever sit down and negotiate in good faith. I think the only thing they understand is power and being in a position of power to make them do what we need them to do. I don't think there's any negotiating. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see it.
No, and China says that, right? The Chinese logic is states compete, first of all. That's what they do. And second of all, they compete for resources. And that's what Beijing's doing. It's competing to control global resources. And we in the US are, I think, fixated on, well, 3 things here. One is some bizarre conviction that has entered our bloodstream over the past decade or so that competition is bad and that you shouldn't try to confront a power, even if they're trying to eat your lunch, and instead you need to cooperate. That's one conviction. A second conviction is even when we're willing to talk about competition, we focus on these like side mechanisms, like trust building or a dialogue or all of the things that have been kind of peripheral to the ultimate goal that countries might have, which China spells out is trying to accumulate global resources. And then of course, the third thing we're fixated on is the Chinese market. And there's so much buying of political power. And I mean, as you've laid out, corporations just claiming puppeteering influence over Washington based on immediate profit, that just compounds all the other trends. So yeah, people who are steeped in the ideology say, no, we don't compete, we just build trust. And people who are steeped in the money say, oh, yeah, let's be friends right now.
Yeah, see, I'm of the mindset, and to go through those, I'm of the mindset that I think competition's a good thing, as long as you're on equal footing, as long as you're playing by the same set of rules. And the reality is we're not. They manipulate their currency. They use slave labor. They break every trade rule possible. They do all the dumping. And I know there are people who will say, but Rick, the U.S. did the same thing. We're as guilty as they are. I don't think to this. I don't think to this extent.
I mean, there's a genocide going on in Xinjiang right now, and also we're buying goods in the U.S. that are made using forced labor in Xinjiang. But also, it always just comes down to this question for me of, do we want to compete for American prosperity and security, or do we not? Do we want to let China, an authoritarian power, reshape the global system, or do we think that's a bad idea? And that question just seems so straightforward to me.
Yeah.
And yet people go through this dance of avoiding answering it and then coming out the other side by saying, no, just sit back and see what happens.
Yeah, well, sit back and see what happens. We were seeing what happens. They eat our lunch. They buy up our industry. I've talked to workers who a Chinese company bought their factory, and they literally had to box up their machinery and ship it to the person who's going to do their job in China, where they recreated the exact factory in China, making the exact product for the exact price, only with basically slave labor.
Yeah, and China has been saying for how long that this is what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And we just closed our eyes to it.
Now, you talked about the market there, and this has been I've heard this for years. In fact, back in the early 2000s, probably 2002, 2003, there was talk of GM building this massive plant, because that was the future. They were going to sell all these cars, and it was going to make them profitable and all this stuff. And it didn't work out the way they had planned. But it was that they've been dangling that, look, you can maybe someday have access to our market. I wish we protected our market somewhat even close to what they're doing, because we still do, while we do have massive inequality in this country, we have a massive market of consumers where, hey, you should have to at least compete to get into it, but we don't do anything. Come on, bring all your junk in.
This is the thing that blows my mind, is that when we talk about China as if China's consumer market far outranks that of the US. And it doesn't. The thing is just that China has more control over its consumer market than the US does. But for example, about a year ago, when suddenly the American cotton industry was being raked over the coals over connections to forced labor in Xinjiang, and all of these US apparel companies came out and said forced labor is bad. We're not going to support a genocide in Xinjiang. And those ranged from Nike to H&M. So you have them making this principled stance, which is pretty obvious. And then Chinese consumers start boycotting these companies. And the response is that the American companies take down all of their commitments to human rights. And they stopped saying forced labor is bad, and they stopped saying genocide is bad, because they wanted the Chinese market. In the US, we accept all of those things, and yet we're not holding the American companies accountable, whereas China is. So you have a much bigger market in the US that these companies should be much more fixated on.
Yeah.
But they know that there's not going to be any action here that actually makes them take the right stance and be principled and support the United States, whereas China is going to force their hand.
And this is where the difference in our political systems come up. I mean, the reality is they're a communist country. It is what it is. While they may practice some version of capitalism that we go, oh, they're capitalists, it's still a communist country. And they play on our ineffective ability to get anything done. I look at this infrastructure bill. To me, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer to say, you know what? Every bridge, every road, everything that we build in this country should be made with American steel and American cement and American asphalt, and we should have American workers doing it. That, to me, is not a huge leap. That's something that's taken for granted as an absolute in somewhere like China.
Yes. And again, I mean, just to take this one beat farther, and we've talked about this before, the reverse is true. When China sees big infrastructure investments in the US, historically, China has been like, oh, this is the opportunity, because America isn't going to make sure that the bridges and the railways are made with American goods, and therefore we can actually, we being China in this context, can increase our footholds in American production because we're going to be the ones that contract to build America's infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that, so then therefore infrastructure investment, instead of helping out the US cause, ends up further chipping away at our manufacturing base.
But you get the people going, Emily, come on, it's cheaper, Emily, come on. We can get cheap stuff. We can do more. We can do more if we use the Chinese stuff. We could do more.
And we're willing to accept, when we talk about traditional defense production, a different economic framework. We're willing to say we need effectiveness, not just efficiency, and national security and autonomy and American jobs are important. How is it that we can do that when it comes to making, let's say, the top tier of an aircraft carrier? Although obviously not everything that goes into it, because that's a whole other story. We can say that there, but we can't say it for the steel and the railways and the bridges that are most essential to American productivity, movement, and construction.
Or it's just simply, N95 masks, or, basic PPE, or any of the basic supply chain that, I'm hoping the pandemic at least woke us up a little bit, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you've got a different view. I'm hoping people are paying attention to our lack of manufacturing capacity right now, because we've ceded most of that to the Chinese.
I hope so. I mean, I had this, just today I was thinking, so Christmas is going to come up. They say that there aren't going to be any presents because of the supply chain situation. Is that going to be the wake-up call where we finally realize we need American manufacturing?
No. What we're going to do is we're going to blame all the workers who are on strike right now. And they're going to blame them because they weren't at work. They should have been at work. Or our kids would have, Kung Fu, have G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip. It's their fault. We're never gonna point our finger at the Chinese, because we've got half of the population that goes, no, we should be like them, and we should help them, and we should all be one big kumbaya world.
Exactly. I remember, 2 years ago, I used to go around and say, maybe we just really need some watershed moment, because the problem with our relationship with China, and realizing the competition, is that it's this very slow, it's this very gradual process, where it gets worse and worse, but there's no one big thing that could trigger a response and make us realize that there's a war going on. And then COVID happened. And it was like, oh, so we got our moment, right? We got our watershed. The switch flipped. China screwed up. China covered it up. A pandemic was born. The American economy fell apart. Supply chain disaster showed that we need US manufacturing. We've had the light switch moment, and yet we still haven't realized what's going on.
No.
And at this point, I don't know what else can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this, the Build Back Better plan and the physical infrastructure plan. These should be no-brainers, and yet here we are. We're in this spot. So back to the report that you guys came out with, footholds and friction, China's European steel front. What kind of response have you gotten, and what do you hope comes out of this?
It's relatively new. Not much response thus far. The hope is that this can inform actions taken about 232. If we just open and take away all regulations on steel trade with Europe, then we're not going to be, as long as Europe is remaining more open to Chinese distortions, then we're not going to be effective about responding to China's unfair trade practices when it comes to steel. That's a very immediate thing.
Right.
More broadly, I want reports like this to change the conversation about U.S. trade practices and to change the conversation about America's relationship with its allies and partners. Responding to China is going to have to be something that is approached through a coalition approach among U.S. allies and partners.
Well, it's a good report.
It's not going to be effective unless the U.S., when it takes trade action, does it multilaterally.
It's a great report. I hope folks will take a look at it. We'll get links out on social media. Emily, as always, I appreciate you taking some time for us and explaining this stuff to us. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Our good friend Emily Bruyere, co-founder of the Horizon Advisory. I'll get that out eventually. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
Severe weather hit the West Coast Sunday, breaking some rainfall records. The downpour caused flooding, mudslides, even shut down some highways.
Historic storm slams drought-stricken western U.S. as climate-intensified extreme weather threatens 90 million Americans.
Increased risk of disease, war, and mass migration would create global chaos.
New reports warn climate change is a growing national security threat. Plus, UN report finds greenhouse gas emissions hit new record highs in 2020.
All of those wrong way stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Saudi Arabia is set to launch an enormous oil-themed extreme park. And to keep the Mideast oil theme authentic, the U.S. is going to invade it.
This is your Green News Report.
Just be sure to wear your poncho when you ride the log flume.
Okay, Desi Doyen, there are so many green news related stories at this point, I have no idea how you're going to pick and choose what should fit into 6 minutes. So I will shut up and let you do it.
Alrighty.
Good luck.
More than 90 million people are under extreme weather watches and warnings across the entire country this week, and it's extreme weather whiplash in Northern California as the state careens from drought to fire to torrential rains and floods. A storm of historic record intensity has slammed the West Coast, helping fire crews extinguish several massive wildfires, but also triggering landslides in burn areas, shutting down a critical state highway. Sacramento went from its driest period on record to breaking its all-time high 24-hour rainfall record on Sunday.
Not whiplash at all.
Such swings in extreme weather are projected to occur more frequently and intensely with man-made global warming. A flood of studies and reports are coming out in the run-up to the crucial United Nations Climate Conference in Glasgow starting November 1.
A flood of stories. I see what you did there.
First up, the United Nations reported on Monday that thanks to rapid growth in clean energy, nations are making progress on lowering their emissions.
Yay.
However, that progress is still not fast enough to meet their modest emissions pledges under the Paris Climate Agreement.
Boo.
The UN's World Meteorological Organization reports that greenhouse gas concentrations hit a new record high in 2020 and are headed that way as well in 2021, saying that the world is way off track in curbing rising temperatures.
We suck.
A third report cautions that natural carbon sinks like forests and the oceans that previously absorbed about half of humanity's emissions are now becoming less effective at doing so.
We really suck. So the Amazon, which used to be a carbon sink, is now actually a source of carbon.
Yes.
Oh, we're so bad.
And the U.S. government released a flurry of reports on climate risk.
Any of them good?
No.
Oh.
The Financial Stability Oversight Council, created in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, declared man-made climate change to be a growing threat to the U.S. financial system. It lays out actions for federal agencies to prepare for risks to the U.S. economy and its banking system to prevent the climate crisis from causing the next financial crisis. However, the report stopped short of pushing regulators like the Federal Reserve to end investments in new fossil fuel projects.
Yeah, why would they want to do that? Don't go so far as to hurt the economy.
A suite of new studies from key federal agencies warns that climate change also poses a major risk to national security. First, the Defense Department assessed how climate change will alter U.S. defense interests around the world. Then Homeland Security issued a strategic framework on defending the country and individual communities from climate threats. A White House report focused on the links between climate change and migration, which is projected to increase dramatically as global warming affects crops and water supplies.
Can't say we weren't warned.
The Director of National Intelligence issued the first ever National Intelligence Estimate on climate change on the geopolitical implications of global warming. That report includes hair-raising scenarios like a desperate rogue nation unilaterally launching solar geoengineering projects that could trigger unintended global side effects affecting extreme weather.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
Aaron Sikorsky, director of the Center for Climate and Security on CNN, warned,
if we don't cut emissions in the second half of the century, the climate impacts are catastrophic to security. It's not just the scientists, it's also the security experts saying it's a real problem.
But finally, some good news. A major breakthrough on the eve of the UN Climate Conference. After years of contentious negotiations, industrialized nations on Monday agreed to provide at least $100 billion annually in climate aid to developing nations to help assist them with loss and damage from accelerating climate impacts. The world's poorest nations have the fewest resources and did not cause the climate crisis, but are suffering its impacts first and worst.
$100 billion
a year.
The U.S. Treasury Department brings in about $300 billion a day some days. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as you know, and I've been talking about this for a very long time, there needs to be more media outlets that cater to working class people. And I've been saying this for a very long time. Our corporate controlled media really does a nice job. It does a nice job of pushing the corporate line, especially the conservative corporate line. You see virtually all of talk radio across this country dominated by right-wing bloviators. It's always been my view that you need working class voices to fill the airwaves, which is why I'm a big supporter of community radio all across this country. In fact, that's where the majority of our stations are found. And thank you to our community radio partners for putting the program on. But, you know, when you get a chance to reach out to other folks doing the same kind of things, I think it's important. And that's why I've asked Cary Harrison to come talk with us. Cary is a public radio and a commercial radio host. His piece, Harrison's Reality Check, heard on more than 300 stations across the country. And here to give us some thoughts. Cary, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you, Rick, and I vote yes for what you just said.
You know, because here's the thing. I grew up in an era where, you know, we had the fairness doctrine, so you didn't really talk a lot about politics. A little bit. There was, you know, a little bit of trying at balance, and then the fairness doctrine goes away, and the right wing basically just takes over all of talk radio, and the left kind of just goes, meh, not that important.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and also I think for a lot of people when they were kids, community radio was talk radio. That was the community. And because of the fairness doctrine, a lot of people may not remember what that is, but basically said if you were going to do a Ku Klux Klan rally, I got to do the opposite, equal time. And it was remarkably taken away over time. And it was Bill Clinton, shockingly, who put the last nail in that coffin. But because of that, we are stuck with a right-wing megaphone from coast to coast, all the news channels except maybe for MSNBC, which is nothing more than an inverted Fox. And so that's even tough to watch. And we're left with these wonderful pockets of places where creative people can get on and try to get the real truth out. And that's what you do there, Rick. Working class people who are the backbone of this country. And we don't say that as some kind of platitude, but it's a fact. I work for a living. You work for a living. People watching and listening to you, Rick, work for a living. We're working people.
Absolutely. And you know, when we started this show 16 years ago, it was with that in mind. The idea that you've got to add some balance to the airwaves and some different voices, because most of the people that we listen to, you know, are multimillionaires who have a special interest at heart, and generally not my interest. So I very rarely ever heard someone say something that I go, yeah, I identify with that, which is why we started this and why I think, again, I want more people doing this. I want more platforms, more places to do it. For instance, one of the stations that we share that we're on together, KPFK out in Los Angeles, a big powerhouse station that look, they're struggling to make ends meet, which is why hopefully folks will listen and maybe send a quick donation to them. And we can get kpfk.org is their website, place to do that. But it's about helping them as well.
Well, it's true. And who listens to public radio? So I'm not talking about NPR. We're the original of NPR. NPR cloned the Pacifica network. So way back in the 1940s when this started, a guy named Lou Hill was giving out FM radios. No one had ever heard of FM before. And engineers called it freaking magic because it still kind of was stereophonic sound. And it was the organization that went into jail when Rosa Parks was arrested, put a microphone right through the bars of her cell and asked her what really happened, which is not what we were all taught in school. She was a cleaning lady. She was exhausted. She was trying to get to the back of the bus, but she collapsed in the front of the bus with a bunch of groceries and bags and stuff and was trying to get up and get to the back, but couldn't quite make it. And so it was retold as that she was, fighting the good fight. Well, she became a poster child. But because of public radio, because of community radio, always the brave ones to get the real story. And our like a pirate, our archives, try saying that 10 times fast, contain these kinds of interviews. And it's interesting, Rick, you mentioned going back to the beginning about community radio. I was in the room in Tampa, Florida, which is where I started in talk radio. They invented Rush Limbaugh. A guy named Gabe Hobbs was the program director, and he was in charge of all talk programming for Clear Channel. He brought us Dr. Laura, another gift, keeps on giving. Glenn Beck, who we used to have to yank out of the adult super center next door to drag him in to get him on the air. I mean, all these just crazy psychos. And we knew, we being that, the station knew that these people were going to attract the lowest common denominator. And it's really all about numbers. And then with the deregulation of who owns what radio station, they all own each other. And what happens? So the advertising that you can't sell on station A, you run on station B, which is owned by the same owner. So it doesn't matter what format, who owns what or what's said. One company owns the entire megaphone and you make all the money. And here we are today in non-commercial radio trying to keep it all together. And it's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, because you don't get to play that game. You don't get to sell advertising. You've got to do it through donations, which is why I hope folks will go to kpfk.org and make a donation, because in this moment, we've never really needed an alternate voice, a reality voice more than we see now, because we live in a world of alternative facts. We live in this world where I've got people telling me January 6th was, it was like any other day. It was kind of like a frat party. It was just tourists walking through the ropes. It wasn't an insurrection. It wasn't bad. It was just people having a day.
It was a putsch. Let's just call it what it really was, and let's use the German word, because this was modeled after what happened in Germany in the 1920s by Adolf Hitler. And I know, Godwin's law, you don't dare mention Adolf Hitler, but you should. Why? Because when Trump was divorced from his first wife, Ivana Trump, the core of that lawsuit, that's what a divorce is, you sue for divorce, what was the central argument in her lawsuit against her husband, Donald J. Trump? He was reading Hitler's second book in bed and memorizing it. His second book? Wait a minute. He only wrote Mein Kampf, one book. No, he wrote a second book called Meine Neue Ordnung, or My New Order. And what he did is he took all the speeches he ever gave from about 1919 up to about 1929 and annotated them and said, when you say this, the crowd does that. Say this word 6 times. And we know this because a professor emeritus named Bert Newborn, who was 96 when I interviewed him a couple of years ago, is a survivor of the camps. And he was able to track Hitler's speeches and Donald Trump's speeches, whether it's Mexicans all being rapists and sodomites and whatever all of this was, word for word Hitler's speeches, but translated sloppily into Trumpese. But that's why he'll say it's very good. It's good. It's the best. It's really the best. It's the most excellent and the best. 6 times over again. All of this out of Hitler's second book, which is why she divorced him. She was from Eastern Europe, and the Nazis were not friendly in Eastern Europe. This is the history that you and I need to know so that we can predict that future. When we see a putsch, we can call it a putsch and not, as you so cleverly pointed out, just another Tuesday.
Yeah, because it wasn't just another Tuesday. But here's the thing. When you have the kind of power that they have, and as you rightfully point out, thanks Bill Clinton for the telecom bill of 96, what they've been able to do is rewrite the history that we lived. And that, I got to tell you, that is really impressive.
Well, and it's effective. And, you know, the problem for you and me is that we're not informed about what's going on behind the scenes. Suddenly legislation happens, it becomes the law of the land, it happens invisibly, and everything changes around us, and we don't know how we got there. And there's no way to keep track of it. You mentioned supporting KPFK, a really good idea, by the way. Let me make a recommendation. Who listens to KPFK? Who listens to your show on KPFK, Rick? A man named Vic Giza. Who is he? He is the top artist for Marvel Comics and Disney. He just finished drawing a custom poster for KPFK, which is going to be a collectible because there's only 100 made, period. Each one signed and numbered. And if you go to kpfk.org, you'll be able to get one of those, and that goes up in value. That's what we do for each other. We create value in our listeners. And your show, Rick, teaches us about the working guy, as if we didn't know, but there's no reflection of any of us out there, is there? There's nothing on CBS Nightly News. There's nothing on CNN. You'd think that everybody was somehow a millionaire living on a yacht.
But isn't that what we're supposed to believe? Isn't that what we're supposed to believe? That we're all going to be, you know, millionaires. We're all going to have the corner office. It's all going to be great. Because that's what I was sold as a kid. That, you know, we didn't need to do those dirty jobs anymore. We were all going to be, you know, financial wizards or whatever. They didn't really get us to the give up the dirty jobs millionaire stage. I don't know how you make the jump, but I was sold on this idea that, you know, everyone's going to be a millionaire and everyone's going to have a corner office. It's going to be great as long as we don't have to worry about those dirty jobs anymore.
Well, what better way to get followers, as Donald Trump did, the lower third of the United States? And cultures are always split up into thirds. You've got the bottom third, which are the ones that follow Trump, that follow Hitler, that follow Kim Jong-un, that follow all of these hootenannies, the Putins. Then you've got the middle third that generally does nothing. They watch Netflix, they go to work, they have sex, they eat dinner, they go to restaurants. They're great, but they're in the middle. It doesn't really matter. And then you have the top third, which are the ones that you could say are woke, the agitators, the ones that march in the streets, the ones that write their Congress people, the ones that want to reverse all of this policy. And my train of thought just derailed all over the tracks. I think I was going to say something great, but I don't know what it was.
You know, basically, I get what you're saying. Look, you've got, you know, the alphas, the betas, and the epsilons, the Steele and Aldous Huxley frame. You've got the, you know, the followers, like, you know, Trump said, I love the poorly educated, and we see a lot of that, you know, every day. And those are the folks who want us to believe, hey, January 6th wasn't a big deal. The sad reality, though, is when you're in using that frame that you've brought up, sadly, the middle third is almost just as crazy as the bottom third, and controlled by the top. And this is what's frustrating to me, because as a student of labor history, I do remember Jay Gould's, you know, comment of, you know, I could easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. This is what we're seeing right in front of us, what's going on right now.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I love the idea of a swing voter. Like, you know, there's independents that just haven't made up their mind. Let's see, Donald Trump, Joe Biden. I don't really. Is there a difference? I mean, seriously, those people cannot even be alive. They're not sentient beings, and it's bull, you know, to claim that they are. But there is a trick that goes on, and it's very clever. And we've seen it throughout European history. We've seen it going back to ancient Greece, certainly the Roman Empire, and it's that of the courtier. If you hang around billionaires and kiss their ass long enough, sooner or later, they're going to invite you to their cocktail party. That's at least what you're told. Is anybody voting for Donald Trump ever going to be seated at his dinner table or ever allowed into Mar-a-Lago? No, not under any circumstance, unless they pay a lot of money And they're not going to get the job to pay a lot of money because they don't have those jobs, and they're never going to get them. They're courtiers, thinking that they're going to get curry favor from the king, but the king has no interest in these noble people.
So we get this now. So the question then becomes, you look at community radio stations, you look at this little giant, if you will, trying to fight these massive corporate stations. It comes down to funding, and I hate bringing this up, and I hate doing fundraising pitches, but we're in a moment right now where I fear there's kind of a lull. There's a kind of lull in the crazy. Everyone's like, oh, okay, things are back to normal. Biden's in the White House. We don't have the idiot out there tweeting all the nonsense. But I fear we're just in the calm before the next storm, because next year can be a bad year, and then 2024 is just around the corner where we're right back in horrible. So I'm looking at this moment as the moment where we start educating, we start inoculating, we start building bigger. So that we can fight back when this craziness really kicks off in the next couple of years.
Well, I hate to agree with you on this one because I wish I didn't have to, but you're absolutely right. I think we have presaged what will next come. Donald Trump is not going away. The Trumpkins and Trumpkinism and all this other business is not going away. It's not shrinking. It's not evaporating. It's not being buried in the giant shadow of Joe Biden. If anything, it is becoming ennobled, enhanced, and strengthened. Certainly with the help of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and every other possible way. It is not going away. We are going to see major insurrections. These people have been empowered, and they have not been punished. They've had a little Nancy Pelosi finger wag, or my favorite, Chuck Schumer, who pulls those glasses down to the end of his nose and says he's very disappointed. Let me define disappointment for you, Dave. Rick. Disappointment is when your summer cottage in Nantucket, in one of the guest rooms, the sheets have not been changed properly by the maid. That's a disappointment. This is a friggin' outrage. And we don't have a Democratic Party standing up for working people that's showing reasonable outrage. No wonder people who vote not Republican or likely Democrat are sitting in the middle watching Netflix and jerking off and just kind of being somnambulistic. The leadership is spineless. You've said it before. I've said it before. Do I wish it were different? Yes. Yep. So you, my friend Rick, are the example of this is what a spine looks like. And we have to do it, because if we don't, January 6th will be just another day. No,
you're absolutely right. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Cary Harrison, public and commercial radio host. GoHarrison.com, the website. Heard on KPFK and hundreds of stations across the country. Last little bit, because I want to hammer home this idea that we need to support local community radio. KPFK.org, one where you can help. One of the stations we're on in New York, WBAI, WBAI.org. By all means, if you're in the New York market, help them out. But also in your local community. There are community stations all across this country that desperately need help, financing, and also manpower.
Well, no doubt about it. As they say, if not now, then when? Unfortunately, there is no when. There is no second act in this. This is the most crucial time we have ever had in U.S. history, other than maybe 1814 when the White House, or 1214 when the White House was burnt down, and it looked like we were going to rejoin the British. Most people wanted to. They were done with this hideous experiment where they had to be accountable. Yep. We're back to that day. They want a paternal organization or a Führer to lead them and clobber the heck out of everybody else around.
Especially those libtards. I love that. But Cary, I appreciate the time. Great stuff. We got to have you come back and share some more in the coming weeks and months. Great having you on. I appreciate it. I look forward to having you back next time.
Thank you, Rick. A pleasure.
Thanks so much, Cary Harrison. Make sure you check out his work over at GoHarrison.com. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as you know, and I've been talking about this for a very long time, there needs to be more media outlets that cater to working class people. And I've been saying this for a very long time. Our corporate controlled media really does a nice job. It does a nice job of pushing the corporate line, especially the conservative corporate line. You see virtually all of talk radio across this country dominated by right-wing bloviators. It's always been my view that you need working class voices to fill the airwaves, which is why I'm a big supporter of community radio all across this country. In fact, that's where the majority of our stations are found. And thank you to our community radio partners for putting the program on. But, you know, when you get a chance to reach out to other folks doing the same kind of things, I think it's important. That's why I've asked Cary Harrison to come talk with us. Cary is a public radio and a commercial radio host. His piece, Harrison's Reality Check, heard on more than 300 stations across the country. And here to give us some thoughts. Cary, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here with you, Rick, and I vote yes for what you just said.
You know, because here's the thing. I grew up in an era where, you know, we had the fairness doctrine, so you didn't really talk a lot about politics. A little bit. There was, you know, some little bit of trying at balance, and then the fairness doctrine goes away, and the right wing basically just takes over all of talk radio, and the left kind of just goes, meh, not that important.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and also I think for a lot of people when they were kids, community radio was talk radio. That was the community. And because of the fairness doctrine, a lot of people may not remember what that is, but basically said if you were going to do a Ku Klux Klan rally, I got to do the opposite, equal time. And it was remarkably taken away over time. And it was Bill Clinton, shockingly, who put the last nail in that coffin. But because of that, we are stuck with a right-wing megaphone from coast to coast, all the news channels, except maybe for MSNBC, which is nothing more than an inverted Fox. And so that's even tough to watch. And we're left with these wonderful pockets of places where creative people can get on and try to get the real truth out. And that's what you do there, Rick. Working class people who are the backbone of this country. And we don't say that as some kind of platitude, but it's a fact. I work for a living. You work for a living. People watching and listening to you, Rick, work for a living. We're working people.
Absolutely. And you know, when we started this show 16 years ago, it was with that in mind. The idea that you've got to add some balance to the airwaves and some different voices, because most of the people that we listen to, you know, are multimillionaires who have a special interest at heart, and generally not my interest. So I very rarely ever heard someone say something that I go, yeah, I identify with that. Which is why we started this, and why I think, again, I want more people doing this. I want more platforms, more places to do it. For instance, one of the stations that we share, that we're on together, KPFK out in Los Angeles, a big powerhouse station that look, you know, they're struggling to make ends meet, which is why hopefully folks will listen and maybe send a quick donation to them. And we can get kpfk.org is their website, place to do that. But it's about helping them as well.
Well, it's true. And who listens to public radio? So I'm not talking about NPR. We're the original of NPR. NPR cloned the Pacifica network. So way back in the 1940s when this started, a guy named Lou Hill was giving out FM radios. No one had ever heard of FM before. And engineers called it freaking magic because it still kind of was stereophonic sound. And it was the organization that went into jail when Rosa Parks was arrested, put a microphone right through the bars of her cell and asked her what really happened, which is not what we were all taught in school. She was a cleaning lady. She was exhausted. She was trying to get to the back of the bus, but she collapsed in the front of the bus with a bunch of groceries and bags and stuff, and was trying to get up and get to the back, but couldn't quite make it, and so it was retold as that she was, fighting the good fight. Well, she became a poster child. But because of public radio, because of community radio, always the brave ones to get the real story. And our like a pirate, our archives, try saying that 10 times fast, contain these kinds of interviews. And it's interesting, Rick, you mentioned going back to the beginning about community radio. I was in the room in Tampa, Florida, which is where I started in talk radio. They invented Rush Limbaugh. A guy named Gabe Hobbs was the program director, and he was in charge of all talk programming for Clear Channel. He brought us Dr. Laura, another gift, keeps on giving. Glenn Beck, who we used to have to yank out of the adult super center next door to drag him in to get him on the air. I mean, all these just crazy psychos. And we knew, we being that, the station knew that these people were going to attract the lowest common denominator. And it's really all about numbers. And then with the deregulation of who owns what radio station, they all own each other. And what happens? So the advertising that you can't sell on station A, you run on station B, which is owned by the same owner. So it doesn't matter what format, who owns what, or what's said. One company owns the entire megaphone, and you make all the money. And here we are today in non-commercial radio, trying to keep it all together. And it's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, because you don't get to play that game. You don't get to sell advertising. You've got to do it through donations, which is why I hope folks will go to kpfk.org and make a donation, because in this moment, we've never really needed an alternate voice, a reality voice, more than we see now, because we live in a world of alternative facts. We live in this world where I've got people telling me January 6th was, it was like any other day. It was kind of like a frat party. It was just tourists walking through the ropes. It wasn't an insurrection. It wasn't bad. It was just people having a day.
It was a putsch. Let's just call it what it really was, and let's use the German word, because this was modeled after what happened in Germany in the 1920s by Adolf Hitler. And I know, Godwin's law, you don't dare mention Adolf Hitler, but you should. Why? Because when Trump was divorced from his first wife, Ivana Trump, the core of that lawsuit, that's what a divorce is, you sue for divorce, what was the central argument in her lawsuit against her husband, Donald J. Trump? He was reading Hitler's second book in bed and memorizing it. His second book? Wait a minute. He only wrote Mein Kampf, one book. No, he wrote a second book called Meine Neue Ordnung, or My New Order. And what he did is he took all the speeches he ever gave from about 1919 up to about 1929 and annotated them and said, when you say this, the crowd does that. Say this word 6 times. And we know this because a professor emeritus named Bert Newborn, who was 96 when I interviewed him a couple of years ago, is a survivor of the camps. And he was able to track Hitler's speeches and Donald Trump's speeches, whether it's Mexicans all being rapists and sodomites and whatever all of this was, word for word Hitler's speeches, but translated sloppily into Trumpese. But that's why he'll say it's very good. It's good. It's the best. It's really the best. It's the most excellent and the best. 6 times over again. All of this out of Hitler's second book, which is why she divorced him. She was from Eastern Europe, and the Nazis were not friendly in Eastern Europe. This is the history that you and I need to know so that we can predict that future. When we see a putsch, we can call it a putsch and not, as you so cleverly pointed out, just another Tuesday.
Yeah, because it wasn't just another Tuesday. But here's the thing. When you have the kind of power that they have, and as you rightfully point out, thanks Bill Clinton for the telecom bill of 96, what they've been able to do is rewrite the history that we lived. And that, I got to tell you, that is really impressive.
Well, and it's effective. And, the problem for you and me is that we're not informed about what's going on behind the scenes. Suddenly legislation happens, it becomes the law of the land, it happens invisibly, and everything changes around us, and we don't know how we got there. And there's no way to keep track of it. You mentioned supporting KPFK, a really good idea, by the way. Let me make a recommendation. Who listens to KPFK? Who listens to your show on KPFK, Rick? a man named Vic Giza. Who is he? He is the top artist for Marvel Comics and Disney. He just finished drawing a custom poster for KPFK, which is going to be a collectible because there's only 100 made, period. Each one signed and numbered. And if you go to kpfk.org, you'll be able to get one of those, and that goes up in value. That's what we do for each other. We create value in our listeners. And your show, Rick, teaches us about the working guy, as if we didn't know, but there's no reflection of any of us out there, is there? There's nothing on CBS Nightly News. There's nothing on CNN. You'd think that everybody was somehow a millionaire living on a yacht.
But isn't that what we're
Those are
supposed
the
to believe?
guests.
Isn't that what we're supposed to believe? That we're all going to be, millionaires. We're all going to have the corner office. It's all going to be great. Because that's what I was sold as a kid. That, we didn't need to do those dirty jobs anymore. We were all going to be, financial wizards or whatever. They didn't really get us to the give up the dirty jobs millionaire stage. I don't know how you make the jump, but I was sold on this idea that, everyone's going to be a millionaire and everyone's going to have a corner office. It's going to be great as long as we don't have to worry about those dirty jobs anymore.
Well, what better way to get followers, as Donald Trump did, the lower third of the United States? And cultures are always split up into thirds. You've got the bottom third, which are the ones that follow Trump, that follow Hitler, that follow Kim Jong-un, that follow all of these hootenannies, the Putins. Then you've got the middle third that generally does nothing. They watch Netflix, they go to work, they have sex, they eat dinner, they go to restaurants. They're great, but they're in the middle. It doesn't really matter. And then you have the top third, which are the ones that you could say are woke, the agitators, the ones that march in the streets, the ones that write their Congress people, the ones that want to reverse all of this policy. And my train of thought just derailed all over the tracks. I think I was going to say something great, but I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna turn it back to you, Rick.
Basically, I get what you're saying. Look, you've got the alphas, the betas, and the epsilons, the Steele and Aldous Huxley frame. You've got the followers, like Trump said. I love the poorly educated, and we see a lot of that, every day. And those are the folks who want us to believe, hey, January 6th wasn't a big deal. The sad reality, though, is when you in using that frame that you've brought